thanks very much indeed for coming along to this presentation. I'm Dianne Kelsey. I'm the MLC and member of the Cabinet Office working with Minister Lord Brennan, but importantly with the planning policy team who are the experts who are going to talk through the process for the latest strategic plan review. And I have in my hand last time's version, which is 2016, which started off in the year 2000, and then was issued. The first issue was 2007. So this is a very long process, and we're looking at the long-term future for the Isle of Man. But the experts know a lot more than I do. So I'll pass you on to Dianne Brown, who's the head of our planning policy team. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to our little presentation tonight. It's lovely to see so many faces out there, some new ones and some very familiar faces, so that's great. I'll be joined later by my colleague Ethan Grubb, and we'll have everybody up on stage here to answer any questions you have. So I head up the planning policy team in Cabinet Office, and my role really is to try and fulfil the Cabinet Office's statutory duty to do the island development plan. That's our main sort of function in Cabinet Office in terms of planning policy. And this duty, like Dianne Kelsey said, is set out in the Town and Country Planning Act 1999. My career started in the Isle of Man government in the late 90s. And I remember joining. I'm just going to give you a little bit of my first experience of the strategic plan and how it came about. So I started in development control, late 90s, and I was handed, as a graduate planner, a daunting set of planning applications and a set of local plans. And, you know, what I soon realised, or probably took a little bit of time to realise, is there wasn't that policy document that sort of connected everything together. There was the government plan at the time, which has had many sort of different iterations over the years. Now it's called our Island Plan, but what we didn't have was something that linked that plan, the government plan, with the various local plans at the local level. So not long after I joined, a couple of years, the Town and Country Planning Act came in. We had started to think about a strategic plan for the island, and that would be more of a spatial document that makes those really important connections and looks at the island from a national point of view. How were we going to develop? Where were we going to, how were we going to think about our settlements and how they were to grow sustainably? So at the start, like Mrs Kelsey said, it was early days. 2001, we started to think about what that draft plan might look like. So by 2004, things were taking shape. And yes, we had an inquiry, and after various little starts and pauses, we managed to get the Isle of Man strategic plan approved by Tynwald. And that was quite a major milestone for the island because it set out what those key overarching policies were going to be. And they have stood the test of time. There was a slight review, there was a very focused review in 2015 where we looked at the housing policies. So it was a very focused review. But other than that, the policies in the the strategic plan we have now are fundamentally the same as what was approved in Tynwald in 2007. So we're at the point now where, almost going back to the start of my little talk there, we found that was the missing piece, and that was what I wasn't given when I first started looking at planning applications, was that document that held everything together and connected things. So the strategic plan. Just going to move on to my slides in a minute. So we're at a very important stage. I'm just going to hope this works. There we go. So a very important stage in policy making for the island. So just as I've set out that little bit of background there, it sets out the overarching planning policy, and it's a well-thumbed document. If you're used to dealing with us as policy officers or planning applications, you may well have found yourself being directed to or working with this plan. So it is something that we now need to start to review, and important to this stage and is what is government's vision as it is now. So now we know that we've got our island plan, which came into operation in January 23. So the strategic plan is really there to achieve the goals in a spatial sense that are set out in the island plan. And we want to do that sustainably, and as sustainably as possible. We want to make sure that there are opportunities there for all of the land requirements that we might need over the next 15 to 20 years. It's our job and our role and the role of the plan to really think about a number of different topics and to try and see all of the links between them, and in the knowledge that we've got a lot more evidence now than we had back in 2004, 2005, when we started to do the original draft plan. So, and we've got more challenges in many ways. And one of the key things that the strategic plan will have to take into account is the Climate Change Act. And that's just one thing that we have to bear in mind when we're thinking about future development, protecting the environment, and providing land for employment needs, thinking about our infrastructure requirements, how do we treat our countryside, all of these different things come into play. So just bear with me a second. Okay, so I sort of hinted there about how fundamental I think this plan is going to be, and it is. It's going to be. It's probably going to be quite fraught going through the whole process, and it's going to be timely, like Mrs Kelsey said, or take time rather, but it is timely too when you think about it, because we've got a lot of things going on at the moment, and it is time to have a look at those big issues: climate change, biodiversity, how we introduce that net gain element into our policy making, how we deal with the flood risk, that all of these issues come into play. So, and importantly, it's going to be used for decision making going forward. So when the planning officers in development management, they're sitting down looking at the applications, their stack of daunting applications that are before them, they will be looking at, okay, what do I do? Well, they will know what they're doing, obviously, but they will be looking at what are the plans, what's that policy framework I am working within. So that's going to be one of the first things they pick up, amongst others, is going to be our strategic plan. So even allowing for gradual reviews that might take place in the next 10 to 15 years or longer, this is going to set that tone and that scene going forward. So in terms of what our island plan is made up of, and it's not to be confused with, actually, yes, our island plan, it's the Our Island Development Plan. And there's lots of terminology, but let's just call it the Island Development Plan. The Act tells us that Cabinet Office has to produce a strategic plan and one or more area plans. So the area plans need to be in general conformity with the strategic plan. So we need to make sure that whatever those general policies are, the plans, the area plans, which are more focused at a local level and might include sites and development briefs, there is that very strong connection with the strategic plan. So there are a number of factors that officers do take into account, obviously, apart from the strategic plan and the area plans. There may well be planning policy statements or development orders and a number of other material considerations that will all go into the mix, all need to be thought of, and those issues need to be balanced. Okay, so I probably said a little bit about what's written on this slide already, but it's The strategic plan is fundamentally a written policy document. You won't find an abundance of maps. There won't be any maps. You might get a key diagram. You might get some explanatory tables, but you won't get site-specific information. So it's high level, and it covers issues that might affect the island generally. It's unlikely to find a policy, for instance, in the strategic plan which talks about sort of housing sites in Peel, for instance. It's unless it's of a general nature, it won't be in this plan. So what we are trying to do is to think about what sort of pattern, scale, and design of development. What are we looking at going forward? So some of the questions that we've asked in our consultation relate to our spatial strategy. At the moment, it's based on, we have the main centre, Douglas, we have a series of service centres, we have service villages and so on. So it's almost like the very start of, let's think about, do we want to continue the way we've always done? Do we just want to focus everything in the east and Douglas? Do we want to sort of expand and disperse our development a little bit more? So it's trying to get everybody to think about these bigger issues, because it really does help set the future development pattern for the island where we all live. So it's really important that we get our the location of development right. So that's what we're trying to do, is create places for the future. And we want those places to be well connected. We want them to be designed well. We have all of these almost, we aspire to make the best places and have all of the right infrastructure in place. And it does take a lot of work to get there. And so we're trying to set the scene almost. We're trying to have not a rule book, but a set of well-drafted, easily understandable policies that everybody can, understand to a certain extent what our development plan is all about, what to expect going forward. We want to start thinking about all of the different uses that we need to plan for, and how are we going to protect our natural, our built environment, our historic environments, our biodiversity. And to help us do that, we do look to all the other documents across government. What are our key bits of evidence we need to look at? So at the moment, we've already started this work, and some of that work has been referred to in our consultation documents, and that gives really just a flavour of what we're trying to have the right evidence for, what we're thinking at this point. With the help of everybody, we can continue that sort of evidence gathering. So we think this is a real opportunity for positive change. Preliminary publicity is what is referred to in our Town and Country Planning Act. It's almost like an issues and options stage. It's almost setting out what our new draft plan is going to deal with in terms of its proposals. So we're trying to set out specifically in some cases what it will do, what it will try and achieve, and in some ways what are the more general issues that we need to work through and know more about before we do our draft plan. So we're coming to the end, I guess, of our consultation. That was launched on the 21st of July 23, and it finishes at the end of September. This is not an absolute cut-off, because we know that this plan will take some time, and everybody needs time to consider what their views are on what's being proposed. Fortunately, I think what's good about the plan process is there are a number of stages to get involved, not least the public inquiry, and with with the different stages and the public inquiry, we're able to ensure that people are able to get involved in the way that they're comfortable with as well. There's that opportunity for verbal representation, and people prefer that. There's also the ability to send in written representations or be represented as part of presenting your views. So, as I said earlier, it will set the scene for any future area plans, and these are what really get into the detail at the local level. They can be, in the past, we've used local plans that are very focused on one particular area, but in recent years, we're trying to reduce the number of overall plans. And that's taken us some time, I do admit. And so we're not quite there yet, but we are starting to look at plans that cover a much bigger geographical area. So key, as I said earlier, we're trying to realise the aims, or help realise the aims of our island plan. We're trying to align with the Climate Change Act and all that brings with it in terms of expectations for development and protection of the environment. And we're trying to support the Building Great Communities programme set out in the island plan. And part of what we're doing at the moment is we're also part of the Built Environment Reform Programme, and our strategic planning and our area planning is very much part of a bigger and wider picture that's going on in terms of planning and development issues. Okay. So probably covered a few of these points, but we are trying to consider all of government's needs in our plan. It's Cabinet Office's responsibility to do it, but we can't do that without engaging with our colleagues across government in terms of the departments and the statutory boards, and only through that and engaging with our public and the people, our key stakeholders, will we be able to achieve that. So, in terms of what happens next, just to cover to the bottom of that slide deck, actually, we're looking at doing a new island spatial strategy, and that's not to say it won't look very similar. It won't look dissimilar to what we have now, but it's a real opportunity to us to think that through. We're going to set out our policy approach for future housing need. We're going to promote urban regeneration within our existing settlements, and it's very much about, I think through the past few years, we're all very much more aware of where we're living and how we're moving around our spaces, and that's going to be very much a part of our policy development going forward. So there's a wide range of issues that we're trying to set a planning policy direction for, and you can see employment, retail, leisure uses. They're all these big meaty subjects that we all need to get stuck into. So engagement is important. It's important whether you live here, whether you're looking to buy a home here, whether you're trying to do business here. All of these different elements are affected by the strategic plan. We are working to try and improve our community engagement. We'd like to obviously encourage younger people to get involved, and we're trying all we can to make sure that we reach as many people as possible. And we do have the help of, often we use our local authority commissioners and friends to help us do that, and we do go out into across the island to try and explain ourselves and what we're doing next with our planning. Okay, so not many more slides. Be pleased to know. So it's all about balance. If you're working in the planning domain or have any input into it, you might well hear us talking about balance. And our goal really is to have a sustainable overall direction for growth, and it does involve the detailed assessment of many issues. yep, we want to consider all of the options and make good decisions. And sometimes we change our minds. It's not a case of the draft plan has been published and that's it. We're not going to consider or change our minds. We do change. Sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we make errors. Sometimes we, think that could be drafted in a different way, a much better way. And so it's a gradual changing. What the document that we might publish as a draft plan, for instance, may well look a little bit different when it gets to the end of the process after various inputs and engagement has taken place. So we need to be able to demonstrate how decisions are made, and we can't make policy without having the right evidence, and that gets tested. So we're very aware that we need to demonstrate why or how we've come up with policy approaches, and often that comes out or is flushed out in the public inquiry. That's a really good way to really get to the bottom of what a particular issue might be. So sometimes at inquiry we found ourselves having much more of a round table discussion about particular issues, and sometimes it can be quite, some have described it as quite adversarial. It's quite, some of these issues are quite emotive, and we do get, but that is all tends to be played out at the public inquiry. So yes, we need to be balanced in everything that we do, and that's the beauty of what we do, and it's a real art in many ways. And a lot of what we deal with is often discussed in the wider sort of Ireland life, wider political life. We are always thinking about how we go about balancing for instance, the need for greenfield development versus brownfield. Where do we focus development? Do we have very focused development, or do we disperse it out? So we often are assessing our needs versus our impacts. So a few things just to think about. We've set out some of these questions in our consultation. We are thinking about our settlement pattern and how that changes, or how do we want to see our settlements grow or not grow. And strategic plans in the past, and the preparation for them, the issue of a new settlement has been discussed, which we haven't proposed a new settlement so far. Do we look at that again? Do we allow building in the countryside? At the moment that we have exceptions, we have 7 or 8 exceptions where it is possible to build in the countryside if you meet certain criteria. So we'll be looking at that, whether those criteria are right, whether we need to make different exceptions or amend those exceptions we have now. How are we calculating our housing need, which is probably, if I was to say, what are the issues we're going to discuss mostly at inquiry? I'm sure housing need and provision will be one of the key issues we talk about. And how are you going to get involved? It makes for a better plan, whatever the views are. If they're expressed and they're given to us, then you're being part of the process then. So it's really key for us to try and reach as many people and different people as possible. So just to sum up what our plan is, this is the last slide. So we're hoping early summer next year to have a draft plan. It's good to be ambitious, so that's what the plan is at the moment. We will be going to a public inquiry. Part of doing a plan and starting a plan and getting to the end of the plan process, there's a set procedure we have to go through. So if you want to get to the end and get to approval, we have to go through a public inquiry. It's presided over by a planning inspector. The department after that, once it's read the inspector's report and considered any modifications that are necessary, the department will have to adopt the plan if it wants to take it forward, and that plan is then taken to Tynwald for debate and approval. So yeah, we've got a bit of time to go, but that's just the process that's involved. So I've probably given you an overview really of what we're doing, and hopefully where it sort of sits in the grand scheme of things. So I think that is the time for the panel and questions. And I'm hoping that there's going to be one or two questions. But I know the minister's just stepped out, but the minister, I'm sure, will be back. Okay, thank you.
Now, one of the things that you've probably been in the other presentations, you'll know about this Slido app. If you don't know about it, go on the code, an app will download, and then you want to type your questions in, that'll be fine. Unfortunately, we can't use a roving mic. So anyone, the lady at the back who's got her hand up, we might need you to come forward or stand up and project your voice as much as you possibly can. So before we do that, although the minister's not here, Ethan Grubb, who works closely with Di in the planning policy team, me really as your MC for the evening, because I don't think we should have a politician necessarily making the decisions at this level. But I will try and sort of manage as people ask questions, and if you use Slido and type in any questions, thankfully we've got some help, but at least I have things to read out as well. But remembering this is about, you will have lots of planning questions, I'm sure, and we'll try and field them all. But this is the planning policy team. It's 3.5 people.
Oh, no, there's
more of us now.
There's 4 in the planning policy team. We're hoping to have another.
Yeah, so it's a relatively small team, and they do not look at planning applications. So if someone's got a burning issue about planning applications, please ask. That's absolutely no problem. But you're not likely to get an answer to your specific query. But what we'll do, which is why having it on Slido will be handy, is because if you've written down, we'll make sure that goes to the right people in DEFRA, or wherever it needs to go to. But you're not likely to get a planning application question answered here. But Ethan, if you'd like to come and join us. Dianne, if you want to sit down, you've worked hard.
No, yeah, all right.
And then the minister's going to short point in. Sorry?
Important for us, like important.
So if I go back to the lady at the hand up, if you're able to project, so everyone can hear the question, that'd be perfect. And if not, come a bit closer, at least we can hear it, and we'll try and answer it properly for you. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Dianne Smith. So one of the questions that I'm dealing with, because I'd like to hear how you might deal with this as a question. I live across the road, literally, not that way, this way. And it's a building that's a heritage building, whatever. And we have these beautiful windows, wonderfully airy, sash windows, that's fine, all great. They can all be replaced with PVC. However, word has it from reliable sources that this kind of planning permission, when requested, is likely to be denied because you want us to stick with wood. So, wood's not efficient, you're going to burn down, cut down trees, cut down forests, you're going to keep planting it, yada, yada, yada. So how are we going to reconcile the need to be environmentally friendly, the need to improve the energy usage in all these older buildings, and many of them are heritage type buildings, and at the same time move with the times in order to do that. So I'm happy to have a sash window that's PVC, but so how are you going to reconcile that kind of conundrum?
Right. Everybody hear me? Yes, working. That's great. Okay, right. In terms of, thank you for your question. In terms of planning applications, which inevitably, if you're talking about changing windows, it sounds to me like there's a planning application in there somewhere, and then there has to be that balance, which is, it happens in planning policy and it happens when you're dealing with planning applications as well. So I don't know if it's a particular case you've been advised. I'm not quite sure where you're at with your window discussions with any planners, but from our policy perspective, yes, if you were to read the strategic plan now, you'll find a section on the urban environment, and you'll find a section in there, paragraphs in there about conservation areas and how we want to preserve or conserve the character and appearance of our best buildings and our best areas. There's also in the strategic plan reference to registered buildings as well, and the need to protect and reuse as much as possible our key buildings. So I think in terms of how we are going to reconcile the issue of sort of replacing a lot of windows in a particularly large building, we have to think about, well, I mean, I'm not in development management anymore, so the application in my past life would have landed on my desk, but no longer. So obviously, the planning officers who are looking at that will have to bear in mind, okay, what's the policy, and what are what's being proposed? How important, has that building been changed beyond? Can we insist on having the timber slide and sash windows in this elevation? What is there any compromising? So it is always difficult, and I think really it all depends on what you're proposing and the merits of that proposal. And
Just a swap from wood to PVC, so it all looks
Yeah.
the same, everything looks the same. So my question is broader. It's, I want the specific. We haven't started the planning
Yeah.
application yet, but it's a principle of energy
No.
and conservation and how that gets reconciled.
I don't think there's a simple answer to that, other than sort of us trying to set out in policy terms what's going to be taken into account when you're dealing with older buildings, and depending on where those buildings are in a conservation area or they're registered, there'll be different levels of quality assessment based on that. And it is difficult.
The point is, we're trying to make a plan that needs to square these things. The lady's point is, on the one hand, you want energy efficiency. On the other hand, you want conservation of the built environment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The plan, your plan, needs to deal with that. Yes, it's difficult.
Can I jump in?
That's
Yeah, of course you can.
thinking about.
Okay, my colleague Ethan's just going to step in.
Yeah, oh, sorry, it's really loud. That's not really a consideration for the strategic plan. That's really an issue for DEFA and their registered building officer. So it won't.
On the one hand, and you've got the built environment on the other. You
Yeah.
square these things.
I'm sure an enterprising architect in the room could network with you and perhaps even suggest some options for you, because there are options other than just replacing, wood for PVC. You can do other things like secondary glazing.
Yeah.
I think you've got to, if you can't say that, that's a DEFA to decide. Because the plan is making decisions, so you have to find
Yeah.
a way to work
Yes, and we do work together, but we can't answer through a strategic plan or an area plan the merits of a planning application that we don't know anything about. So we have to set out a certain level of policy guidance, and we have to set out what needs to be taken into account. So when an officer is looking at a particular planning application, and right now I don't know what your situation is with your planning application, but all of those different, and I said earlier, it's the merits of that application that need to be taken into account. So the officers are looking at the circumstances and they're writing their assessments based on policy or the material considerations, the planning policy statement on conservation and the environment, and any other guidance that's out there, particularly, you know, where that building is, how it's been altered, what's the impact of that on the character of the street scene. So an application will, and that's why reports are written, to be able to balance all of these arguments and then make a recommendation to either approve or refuse or approve with conditions. So I think that's where we're at. What we're trying to do now is move forward and make sure that that policy, that strategic policy, is set at the right level, so you haven't got a situation where it's very strict and the answer is no straight away. The answer is not normally, or the preferred method is, and then, you know, then you work it all out from there, and then so that's the planning application stage that's required. It's not that we're not thinking about how all of these bits fit together. It's just a complicated set of considerations that need to be worked through.
And that's where the planning officers who are looking at the applications within DEFRA have got to take in all these policies as well as all the other stuff. And they also have that balancing act. But it all has to be transparent, and it all has to be open for appeal and scrutiny. So I get it. I hear exactly what you're saying, and I understand that. I mean, I was living in a Grade 2 listed building in the UK, and we had to have heritage windows. There was no choice. So, it was very, very specific, and they were 5 times the price of putting in a PVC window. But you didn't have a choice. But the issue here is we don't have the same system. But what we will do is that the policies will at least give the general view, which then the planning applications have to be in conformity with. So it could be about your building, it could be about your window, it could be about where you live, but it could be a combination of all those things and others. And I know someone's got a hand up, but somebody very early on, Matthew Warren, asked the question, how do we include the UNESCO Biosphere Isle of Man within the plan? But just so you're aware, there's also a question about how do people get involved in the consultation, which I'll cover in a minute. So can I ask the experts how we have included, or how we plan to include, the biosphere as opposed to the net gain or any other bio words? Yes,
yeah, well, we are the only all-nation biosphere, which is something, I think we've acknowledged that already as part of our consultation, in our consultation document. So yes, of course, we have to acknowledge that status as it is now, as well as all the other the biodiversity net gain, which one thing the Climate Change Act does do is set out very specifically what our strategic policies need to address through our strategic plans. But in terms of our biosphere, clearly, at the moment, we already know that, you know, there is a strong sort of island plan focus on making the best use of our urban areas, the best use of our brownfield sites, not building on greenfield land when it's not necessary to do. But I'm sure someone will say, but you want to build, or, you know, you need to build houses, you need to build schools, different infrastructure that might have to happen in the countryside. And again, of course, all of these elements are material to any decision making that's made at the planning application stage. So there is likely to be, you know, a clear narrative about the Isle of Man biosphere and what it means, and how we've taken that as an approach, as a concept, as a overarching, what the island, the very best of the island, how we're going to get everything we need and still have that sustainability and that approach going forward to be able to retain our biosphere status. And that's why our job is sometimes it's challenging, but it's something we are sort of trained to try and look at all of these things all at the same time. And it's not always easy, I will admit that.
So Jennifer Smith has asked if I've got 3 questions, and 2 of them are quite they link together straight away. So Jennifer has asked, how can everyone be involved in the consultation? So you go to gov.im on the website, or now you know them, you can actually phone them up or preferably send them an email, and we'll make sure that if anybody wants to engage that doesn't want to do it directly on our line, we'll make sure that Di and Ethan are here at the end, that they can give you their details, because we really do want to hear from people, otherwise it doesn't work. And it said, where will the consultation documents be reviewed? Well, by people sitting here. So, and then they'll go out into the draft plan, which will then go to planning inquiry, which is an independent inspector. And at all stage, that is public. Obviously, what they do sitting in their office, 9 till probably 10 o'clock at night, all the way through this process, you can go and sit with them, but that's not the public bit. But what comes out of it at the other end will be all public and available to be changed and scrutinised. And then there's a question that says, from Jennifer, says, who does planning report to? Now, this is a really interesting one. And it is, are you Jennifer? Yeah, hi, Jennifer. I thought it might be you with the thing. Well, actually, it used to all be in one organisation within, presumably, local government, whatever it was. Anyway, a while ago. And then it was decided that essentially these guys are the strategic view, setting policy based on political decisions and publicise this is the way the Isle of Man is going to go. So if we decided we wanted to be, you know, every building on the Isle of Man needed to be blue because that's what Dianne Kelsey is her favourite colour, then that would be written into policy. Clearly I'd be drummed off the island, but that would be written into policy because that's within the Cabinet Office. But actually the applications that come in go into DEFA, so they're kept separate. So essentially you've got the DEFA planning officers who also do the registered buildings. Help me, is there other? Oh, the building control side of it as well. So some of those really detailed stuff about either an individual planning application or the tone of planning applications, then quite a lot of that is in DEFA. And they do, I wouldn't say they're well-resourced, because I'm sure they'd say the same, but they do have, because they have slightly more things they've got to deal with, and they're dealing with stuff all the time. So those planning officers essentially report to the DEFA minister, whereas Di and Ethan report to the Cabinet Office minister. So there is a division, but of course, what also happens is within Council of Ministers, it's then discussed so it fits in with the overall island plan or the future of the Isle of Man, because we're talking about in the main long-term future stuff is what they deal with. So Jennifer, have I answered your 3 questions? Thank you. Okay, I'll take one for the gentleman at the back, and you were very patient while I was going through the iPad. Please. Hi, Lee.
So my question is a strategic one. So we talked, there's an island biodiversity strategy. I was at a meeting last week where there's a discussion with farmers about an island agricultural strategy for the future. There's renewable energy plans that are on the table. And so for me, I imagine that in different rooms, there's different plans of the island with different layers on. And so I just want to know how we're making sure that all these layers come together in a coherent island plan, please.
Yeah.
Especially with the farmers, because 75% of our island is agricultural land, and that's going to be a big factor in whatever development potentially takes place. So it'd just be nice to hear how those different strategic discussions are aligning.
Yeah. Okay. In terms of part of what we do and part of what we need to make sure we do is keep up to date with everything that's going on across government, which is no mean feat. So I think part of our consultation, you will see we'd started to sort of highlight some of those core documents that we wanted sort of to bring to the public's attention, really, that are already on our radar. And behind the scenes, we have a much longer set of documents and strategies that we need to keep abreast of. We do work closely with a number of different teams in different departments and the statutory boards. So we do have internal working groups that we are part of, and we do talk regularly to our colleagues. So what we're trying to do, always better to be honest, is make sure that we are engaging early with those teams, with those strategies, with those departments, and you know, to make sure that we are keeping abreast of everything that's going on through the Chief Officer Group and extended Chief Officer Groups to make sure that we're not missing anything, we haven't overlooked something, we're fully engaged with what else is going on. So sometimes it doesn't always feel that clear until you've seen a draft plan, for instance. And that's when you can really, at the moment, people are, well, what are they going to do? What's going to happen? Are they going to remember this or take that into account? How is this going to factor into it? Sometimes when a draft plan is published, that can really sort of focus people's views on an issue or issues that are important to them, and can really see then how we are recognising other strategies, taking them into account, and making sure that the policy that's drafted is workable and it works. And it's often that, you know, the actual wording of policies, we agonise over if we've got ands and commas in the right place, and we're referring to the right level of strength almost for that policy. Is it a definite no, you can't build in this area, or is it a case of, you know, you shouldn't build in this area, but there may well be exceptions if you can demonstrate or mitigate for, and that's the sort of the tricky bit in terms of getting that right. And that's when you can get that engagement with the likes of yourself, and for the likes of, you know, the flood management team or the education or the health teams that are working with us, if that sort of
and
helps.
The other good thing about this is because it's very public, let's say we have done something and it comes out as a draft plan, you go, they have missed something really, really important. Well, that's where you have to help us in that process, is that we won't have missed it deliberately. We've missed it because we've missed it. We mentioned earlier about making mistakes and errors. We are human. So therefore, if there is something, please do holler, and you can holler at any time. And as long as it's relevant, these guys will incorporate it within the plan. So it won't be ignored if I'm correct. Before we go to public inquiry and approval, you know, it's open to all inputs, and we're really, really keen for people to input into this work.
Yeah, I mean, the inquiry stage is quite, and I realise it can be quite daunting. And if anybody was at the Area Plan for the East inquiry, I think us as officers were often a little bit daunted by everything that was going on. But it's the inspector. It's open to the inspector if they want to hear from or accept new evidence. So if it's valuable to them, you know, there is an ability to submit something in writing or appear at the inquiry. As long as you're on the timetable to appear, turning up on the day is not always a good idea. But if you feel like you haven't been listened to, or your points not being recognised, or the policy in your view won't work, you are able to get involved right up until the inquiry.
But the sooner you get engaged, the better. So I'll come to you in a minute, Kiri, and I think somebody over here had their hand up as well. I've got a specific one here, which was anonymous, but it says, will the strategic plan look at floodplains, and will this restrict planning in specific areas of the island? And I know between you've been working on this, so happy for either you to answer.
Yeah, just last week there was a meeting of the Flood Management Coordination Committee, which is a way of describing sort of key experts in the room, and especially from the Department of Infrastructure. And we talked together about all of the work that's going on in terms of updating the flood maps, doing helping towards getting our policies right. So I know that DOI are working on their side of things in terms of flood risk management, and providing us with everything we need to be able to draft that overriding policy. So we're already aware of work that's going on, and I think what the strategic plan has done, and the talk of doing this plan has done, is got everybody to sort of think, right, okay, this is really important. We're going to have to now make sure our evidence is up to date. So, because once the plan started, we're on that not treadmill, but there's a time limit for us to produce that draft plan. So we've issued our preliminary publicity. Once that's officially sort of said, right, okay, we've ended that, there's a clock ticking. And that's to keep us on our toes, that's to keep the evidence up to date, and make sure once the draft plan is done, it's still relevant. It's not been dragging on for years. And if it does drag on for years, then that's the point where you have to go back and do your preliminary publicity again, because it's risk it's out of date. Yeah.
I've got two, which are, I think, more political type questions. So now the minister's in the room, in case she chooses to take these, or we might be able to take these offline, but I'll put them to the team so they can give you an idea of how they work with this. So they're both from Anonymous, maybe the same person, because the same sort of tenor, which I'll bring them together. You mentioned about integrating the Climate Change Act within the strategic planning. How practical is this going to be? Given the current economic climate with high interest rates, I'm sure government departments and budgets are also constrained. And this follows on to the how much involvement does Treasury have in relation to the strategic plan? Does the Treasury support the new climate change initiatives? And is there funding available for these initiatives? So quite a lot of stuff there, but it's like, we've got all other government policies. So this really ties in with Lee's comment as well. But none of these things can be written down, and it's got to be, it's got to be this way, because if they're going to cost £1 billion, it's not going to happen. So really behind the scenes, and then if the minister wanted to say anything, but I think these are just straightforward. How did the team deal with those sort of questions when you're putting policy together about the potential costs and whether Treasury is willing to get behind them?
Right, there's a lot in that question. I mean, I'll just say one thing is that the Climate Change Act is quite clear about how the Town and Country Planning Act is going to change as a result of the Climate Change Act, what the knock-on effect's going to be, and what our policy requirements are going to be. So for the likes of, we talked earlier a little bit about biodiversity net gain, we've already started to think and put the work projects into place as to working out what's going to work best for the island. Is it easy to copy what's happening elsewhere? And to be honest, no, it's not always easy to just lift other policies and drop it into the Alaman. We like to pick the best bits and work with make sure it's working for us. So that work is already going on. So the knock-on effect of the Climate Change Act, whether it's looking at carbon sequestration or active travel or sustainable urban drainage systems, that work is all carrying on in the background. So hopefully, by the time we come to do a draft plan, we're a lot more informed. So, yeah, Minister, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is that the Climate Change Act, the requirements of certain things that need to be taken into account of, that the strategic plan as a planning policy document, that stuff is already set out. So unless you were to revoke elements of that act, that's absolutely something that the team would have to take account of. As to the financial element, I think this is the distinction that's required when it comes to, what is the strategic plan? Because it's a policy frame of reference, in and of itself, it doesn't determine specifically build and fund that infrastructure project there. So, it's really about a policy frame of reference rather than something that, Treasury would be taking a view on in terms of funding individual projects. So I know that Ethan and Dianne will have much more of the specifics that are included in the Climate Change Act, but hopefully that kind of clarifies the interaction of those things. But on the broader point, in any sort of planning process, you've got all this stuff has to be taken into account, in balance. And I think that's why officers on the other side of things, they have a job, and also the officers here have a difficult job in putting all of this stuff together, because it's very easy for things to become, full emphasis just on one aspect, when you're quite right, there's other things that people are dealing with on the day-to-day that have financial and economic and other impacts on their lives. So hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Minister.
I was going to say something.
We'll come back to that,
Yeah.
because I know that Kiri put her hand up and there was another gentleman, and then I've got two more on here. We've got 5 minutes left, so that's why I wanted to come to as many of the questions as possible. So, Kiri?
Very quick question, really. You said in your presentation that you wanted to reach as many people as possible and you wanted to include as many young people as possible. Why is it that you launched a consultation at the beginning of the summer holidays? Why have you set a hard deadline of the 29th of September, which gives local authorities roughly a week, because many of the local authorities don't meet over the summer? And if you were serious about getting as many people as possible, why aren't you doing roadshows to every local authority so that people can engage with you directly?
Good question.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like why did we do that? It does. In some ways, there's never a good time to release documents, and we do try and get it right. But yes, we did launch when we were ready to launch. It was a good time. There was a three. It was for 12 weeks, and so in terms of the local authorities, I think a number of local authorities we've it's sort of informally given them some extra time. And I think if anybody was to ask us, time is an issue, then we would be willing to talk about that and try and accommodate any concerns. So.
That you haven't given people enough time. And why should people have to ask for more time? If
Yeah.
local authorities specifically requesting an extension, it should be open to all local authorities and the general public.
Well, that can, if that's an issue, we can discuss that as part of the department and either formally do an extension. Of course, what you have to, it is very difficult to but it is important to have an end. At least put a line in the sand that this is really what everyone, hopefully, because otherwise you would never get to a point that we were setting the clock to start, and there comes a point where the evidence that we're building up is starting to get out of date. And so we need to, we clearly understand that local authorities, it can be more tricky. So that's why we're...
So could I ask then, is the 25 deadline, is that a politically set deadline? And if so, why? And if time is of the essence, how come you've got you've only got one adopted policy statement? There's lots of planning policies that have actually been there. Some of them have been sat there for 34 years and not adopted. So are those planning policy statements now going to be brought into this plan? How are you going to handle planning policy statements in future?
Well, planning policy statements, they haven't been used, you're absolutely right, very much in the past. And they do need a hook in the strategic plan. So part of what we're doing, and we do recognise there are a few draft planning policy statements. I don't think any of those are older than 2009, I don't think. So once the new strategic plan is up and running and underway, and then hopefully it will go through its route, then we're able to then have the right hooks to put planning policy statements together if needed. So they more direct how planning applications should be dealt with. So if we're talking about, for instance, flood risk assessments and and we have a strategic policy about flood risk, then we may well want to have a planning policy statement that goes into more detail, for instance, about how flood risk assessments should be put together and dealt with and considered as part of a planning application. So I think we recognise that we can't put everything in the strategic plan. There will be other potential policy guidance notes, statements is the right term, that come out of the new plan. And yes, some of the plans that we have are considerably old. I mean, I talked about me starting work at the end of the 90s, and I dealt with the west of the island. I think all of the plans that were available to me then are still the plans now. So, but they've stood the test of time to some degree. But there is the time now to look at the strategic plan, and the area plan format, whatever that, how that's going to look in the future. So we are looking to improve and change the situation that I think you've just described. Clearly, in terms of consultation, once we've done the draft plan, there'll be another consultation. Then we go to inquiry. That's an area that's of consultation, and then potentially modifications as well. And there's another time then to put in representation. So we're trying to balance all of this and just keep the process going. That's we're not intending, of course, to sort of release things at a difficult time of year or a time when it's holidays. If you left it another few weeks, we'd be heading into the Christmas holidays, and then there's always some holiday coming up.
But on that, it is a good point. And in fact, Betty L has said, what engagement strategies are you planning as part of research for the new strategic plan development? And in fact, for trying to do it through the consultation hub is to try and get the information out. There's quite a few documents in there. There's a 2016 extant document, and those policies stand until we have a new strategic plan. And the issue we'll always have is there's only a certain number of people and they've got other things to do as well. So no, there's no political, other than us saying we need to move on to whatever the next stage of this is. But engagement of it, if there are people in the room that say, well, actually, you should be doing something else, and we'll look at it, and I agree with you. It shouldn't be that if Arbery asks for something, that we don't let Braddon know that we're doing that for Arbery. So it's a good point. So we need to make sure whatever we do, it's fair and equitable across everybody, but that's for the public as well. But there is no rush here. It is just part of laid out, as we did in our Cabinet Office plan last year, of all the things we want to deliver at certain times. And I mean, genuinely, unless you're going to tell me, did I tell you to do something at a certain time? No. Yeah. So it is what it is. But
yeah, I mean, it's sometimes what we ask is if people are going to submit something and it's going to come in after the deadline, then there's no harm in dropping us a line. I'm not quite ready. It needs some more time, and it'll be submitted on this date. From the experience for the area plan for the East, there was we didn't stamp late on anything. It was a case of this was the consultation time. This is when this came in. But the inspector was very open about if it had value and it was important, they would take it into account. So it didn't rest or fall on, well, it was only submitted. It was submitted late, or we're not going to read it. That's just not the case at all, because we know very well that further down the line the inspector might give it. So that's my view anyway. It's not that we set it aside or don't respond or give it a different code. If anybody was interested when that came in, we would just be very open about when that was submitted. But if we know something's coming in, that's always helpful. So
let us know. Let the team know what you want to do, what engagement you want with it. And if someone's got some good ideas, and I know the team will listen in, for area plans, it's a bit easier because you go out to the area and you talk about people's local communities. This one is not subtly different, massively different. This is strategic view about what the future of the Isle of Man may look like, and it may look exactly the same as it is now, but we don't know. We don't do this review properly, and that's where everybody being engaged is important. Now, there is one more question on here, but it's very specific about housing in brownfield sites. So as we run out of time, we will, if that person, if they really want to know the answer, if they let the team know who you are, I'll get them to come back to you. And there was a gentleman over there had his hand up at one point. Yeah. Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, you're getting bogged down in too much detail. Surely there's too many people involved. Some accountability, make a decision and do it. You do the overall plan. I mean, if you think about it, the Victorians, there was no planning committee.
No, I know. Yeah.
Drafty windows. Drafty windows, for instance. Would you want to keep that?
Yep.
Just move ahead and go
Yep.
forward. Developers develop what's the market is.
Yeah, it is a fine balance, and sometimes what you won't find is us sort of trying to master plan people's developments and getting down to the real sort of, but sometimes it is important. So, that's why we have a planning system.
but that's why the overarching policy is.
It's a very good point. Yeah, we need to get. And we do. That's why we're trying to get everything right first time round, and try and help the department make those decisions and make the right decisions for the island. That's our job, is to work out all of the detail and come down to the best sort of policy approach that's in line with what government wants.
Yeah, it's just that I could see in a couple of years' time that anybody who wants to lift the turf on an extension or a development. Have to round up all the worms
No. Actually,
Depends what type of worm.
yeah. No, we're actually, you know, I'm hoping. Yeah, we should end on a laugh, really, shouldn't we? So we'll end when everyone's giggling. But yeah.
We're going to put one in specially for you.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I know. Yeah. But if we're here and to talk. But no, thank you very much, everybody, for coming along. It's great. Every table's nearly full. Thank you.